Dr. Richard Wolff dropped by to talk to us about why is it that interest rates have been staying so low, even though debt is so great, is so high. It's like the rules of economics have been rewritten in a weird way. Check it out. It's fascinating. And leave your comments, ding the bell, and please subscribe. Dr. Richard Wolff is with us, the economist and co-founder of Democracy at Work. Democracyatwork.info is the website. His most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis, deepens essays on the global economic meltdown. And you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, P-R-O-F-W-O-L-F-F. His other website, rdwolff.com with two Fs. Dr. Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Welcome back. It's very kind to hear. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here.
It is always great having you. I love our conversations, and I always learn something from them. Back in the 1970s, I remember really high interest rates, and the story was that, we had inflation, and so the Fed was raising interest rates to bring down inflation. At the time, I was thinking that the interest rates were causing the inflation. I never really understood that relationship in a way that makes a whole lot of sense. And Axios has a piece today in their econ blog about how basically economic orthodoxy on the relationship between interest rates and inflation has just been turned on its head, and we are now in the highest levels of personal and corporate and governmental debt in the history of the United States, and in some ways the history of the world. What does all this mean, and how does it work together?
Well, I think the insight you mentioned at the beginning is very, very important for people to understand and to see the history of. Here, you really can't overstate this. We thought, after the Great Depression of the 1930s, that we, and by that I mean the governments and the economics profession, had somehow figured out how to make sure this kind of catastrophe doesn't happen again. We passed the Banking Act, we set up Social Security, we developed the Council of Economic Advisors a little bit later to advise the president. We thought we had mastered Keynesian economics so we could do monetary and fiscal policy properly, and it all came crashing down with the collapse of 2008. And not only did that collapse indicate to us that it was self-delusion that we had figured out how to manage the cycles and the instability of capitalism, but that we really had nothing else to put in its place. So we've been, in a way, kind of treading water, trying things we have never tried before, not because they're good and clever ideas, but because, as you put it in the earlier segment, we're desperate. Let me give you an example. We've had the lowest interest rates in history. There are many parts of the world where interest rates are now negative. We've never done that kind of thing before. We've pumped, when I say we here, I don't just mean the United States. I mean the central banks of Western Europe and Japan and so forth. We have pumped more new money into the world's economy in the last 10 years than anyone had ever imagined, let alone done. We have seen wild gyrations. We have seen the inequality of income and wealth, which most people see as itself a cause of the 2008 crash, not get less, which is what happened after 1929, but to get worse. In other words, the inequality keeps growing. And then there's a story, just to finish it off, in today's Bloomberg, which points out that the conditions governing corporate loans are looser and less protective against default than they've ever been in the last 10 years since that crash. When you put all this together, and you're seeing a situation where, we're not going to see the same relationship between inflation and interest rates. Things were so bad in the last quarter of 2018 that we started off this year raising interest rates even further because we got to do something about all that money sitting out there. But the minute the government tried to do that in Europe, here, Japan, the economic crash literally began unfolding on us. With higher interest rates, nobody can cover the debts they've accumulated. Nobody is willing to borrow money to play in the stock market the way they normally did. The stock market went down like a rock, and it became so grim that Mr. Trump's desire to run for re-election with lower interest rates was suddenly going to be undertaken by the same Mr. Powell who a few weeks earlier had said he wouldn't do it. Things are desperate. They're not under control, and we're dealing with an economic ship that's kind of rudderless here, and we're bouncing around. The people in charge are trying to put on the face that they have it under control and things are going real well and the recovery is underway. But the political life of society, the chaos of the Trump administration, the even greater chaos of Brexit in England, of the Yellow Vest movement overturning French society, and I could go on. These are the signs and evidences of an economic crisis that is bubbling very low below the surface.
So you mentioned that our government and other governments have basically been printing currency. We've been printing dollars, you know, in increasing the money supply here. The European Union is doing it. The Japanese are doing it. And high school econ, right? When you increase your money supply, your money becomes worth less. You've got more dollars chasing the same number of goods. And the consequence of that is something called inflation, which is merely a fancy way of saying that you're deteriorating or degrading or reducing the value of an individual dollar. How is it that that's not happening? Does it have something to do with the fact that Reaganism has wiped out most of the American middle class, and so
Absolutely.
People don't have purchasing power anymore? So even though there's more dollars, those dollars are simply accumulating in the pockets of people at the very, very top, like the Koch brothers?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as they say in the parlor, bingo, that's it. What you've done is you've removed the vast purchasing power of the poor and the middle in the United States. So that, yes, there's all this money sloshing around that has been, but it's all been spent by people who play the stock market. So it goes from the hands of the bank, who gets the money first from the Federal Reserve. They lend it to their richest clients, who use it to buy shares on margin, it's called, when you put down a portion and you borrow the rest to buy shares, and then plan on selling them a month or two down the road to other people who've gotten their hands on this slosh of money. And the reason that you don't see an inflation is the businesses that produce the food, the clothing, the shelter, the appliances. They're facing a market of people who can't afford to buy this stuff. You raise the price, you're going to lose a sale. For a while, those people made up that situation, overcame it by borrowing. But they're now so deeply indebted with mortgages, with credit cards, with car loans, and now the new one with college loans for their kids, that they're not in a position to do it. So all the money goes in, but the prices aren't raised because the sellers are facing a mass of the population that has been bypassed by the so-called recovery. The money is at the top, sloshing around there, and ironically, if ever it stops doing that, if those folks at the top get frightened about holding their money in cash and they start buying things, then you're going to see the inflation as traumatically shooting up, as today you're wondering why it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, I think we're already seeing that to a certain extent. I mean, the price of major yachts has gone up dramatically. We're seeing, I mean, you know, really fancy, really expensive first-class airfare tickets, I've noticed.
Right.
You know, 3 years ago, you could buy, you know, a business-class ticket from the United States to Europe pretty much on any day for around $3,000 or $4,000. Today, they're $9,000 and $10,000. I mean, you know, pretty. It's just.
But those people at the top are in a position to do that because they don't really care.
That's right.
They've been the beneficiary of everything for so long now that people are noticing the question you ask, why with all this extra money aren't the prices going up? And the answer is that the businesses who have to raise the prices of most things can't afford to do and to lose the sales, while the people who sell to the top, you know, the luxury goods producers, they are in a wonderful situation.
Yeah. And now, this brings me, and we just have about 2 minutes left, this brings me to my last question. CapEx, capital expenditures, is referred to as CapEx, C-A-P-E-X. And I caught this from an economist, David Rosenberg, from his Twitter feed. He says core CapEx orders dipped 0.1% in February and have declined now in 3 of the past 4 months. Over that time, they have contracted at a 3.5% annual rate. Now, my understanding is capital expenditures, this is businesses buying equipment to expand their production and modernize their production.
Exactly.
When that stops or when that goes negative, that means literally outside of the financial realm, your economy has stopped or has started going negative. Am I right in that assessment?
Absolutely, and that's one of the key statistics that leads so many commentators these days, left wing, right wing, and in the middle, to predict a recession, to predict a downturn, to predict real problems for Mr. Trump's reelection, which in turn puts pressure on him to lower the interest rates so that at least you keep the bubble going for those at the top, so they will be happy enough with Mr. Trump to give him the funds to tell the stories he likes to tell, to slide him into office in 2020. They're all now aware that the underlying economy is a disaster, and they have to keep the attention away from it. That's why you have all the theater around the dealings with the Chinese or with the immigrants
at our
border. Yeah. Keep it away from the underlying reality that is grim.
Yeah, and yeah, don't talk about don't talk about all that stuff. Wow, how long do you think we have?
Not much longer. This has been going on now basically for 10 years. The crash happened in the late part of 2008, rolled over into 2009, maybe even early 2010. We've had about as much of a stretch out as possible. We have pumped the money at the top. That has trickled down very little. That is making people angrier and angrier. It's an explosive situation, and the rest of the world looking at us knows it.